Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Niccolo Milanese. I'm the chair of an organization called European Alternatives, which is a citizens' movement working for a more democratic and equal Europe. I have the pleasure of moderating this discussion, which has the title Futures Debate, Next Generation Voices from Across the Region Debate on the Refugee Crisis. Now, I think that no one on the panel is able to predict the future, and so my understanding of futures debate and next generation is that the people here who are on the panel have some lived experience on the ground, as it were, when it comes to dealing with this refugee situation, and possibly as a result of their experience have a slightly different understanding of the nature of the situation and the way it's likely to evolve, also the way we ought to react to it, than some other people. And we could hope perhaps that this understanding will, in the future, become more and more widespread. At least that's what we're going to try and work towards. I want to start because, as I say, the participants here have got some experience on the ground, really working with the refugees. I want to start by turning to you, Nadia, and also reminding the participants to introduce also what you do, because it's particularly interesting in this context. But to turn to you, Nadia, and ask about this issue of how practically can we build interaction, dialogue, discussion between settled communities and people on the move, shall we say, whether they be migrants, refugees or others. How can we practically do it? What experience do you have?
So the experience from Greece right now, in Greece we are currently in a past emergency state. The boats you see arriving in Lesbos and Chios on the islands, back then we were in an emergency state where there was little we could do to interact besides providing humanitarian aid. However, although it is fair to plan integration programs and look in the future, we have a very, the reality right now is that we have 58,000 people in Greece who are awaiting determination of their legal status. They don't know if they're moving on or if they're staying and for how long they're staying. So at this point, we can say we're in a time limbo. It is very difficult to talk about integration because we don't know where they will be integrating. And the first reason is we don't know if they want to integrate right now. So for me, it's more important right now to talk about interaction, about trying to build basic links with the communities where they are now, and trying to hear their voices and see how we can help them have a life right now, living in the present and living in the moment, restoring their self-worth for the adults, helping the children have more structure in their lives so they can be ready for in the future to integrate where they go in their final stations.
Thank you. Maybe, Andrea, if I could also turn to you, your experience with Baobab. You also have, quite a few stories you were telling me earlier on of quite straightforwardly welcoming people who are coming through Rome for one reason or another. And so I wonder if you can build on what Nadia said and also draw out this element that we're talking about a refugee crisis as if there's the refugees or people on the move, and then there's the settled citizen, and they don't cause a crisis. It's as if the problem is over here with the refugees, and yet this whole distinction maybe is one that we need to draw into question.
Yes, good evening everybody. I coordinate the work of volunteers and activists in a small place in Roma, which used to be a small refugee center for not more than 150 persons. Since last year, we had almost 1,000 persons per day. It's mostly it's almost all migrants in transit, which is a little bit a different kind of migration. Italy and Greece know it very well, the transit of migrants. And mostly Eritreans, Ethiopians, Somali people who just are passing by Roma for 2 or 3 days and waiting for money to get them and to finish their trip in the countries of Northern Europe. This is the situation where we moved. We started doing something that none of us works with migrants. We all have our jobs, we all have our things, so it's something that just happened because at a certain point in a station right in the center of Roma, we had more than 1,000 persons in the street. And institution couldn't do anything because migrant in transit, since the Dublin Treaty, they don't exist. They cannot exist. So it was like more than 1,000 ghosts in Roma. But we understood that they weren't ghosts. There were men, women, children during their trip. So we started organizing, what can we do? We can feed them, we can make them sleep, we can, if they need sanitarian help, medical aid, we can help them, but that wasn't the question. The question is that what we asked ourselves was, what would we like that could happen to us if we were in their situation? If we have to leave our country because of war, because of hunger, because of a dictatorship, or because we want to leave our country and just travel like almost all of the young people like to do in the world, but not all the young people in the world can do it. Not only because they can afford it, but because there is a difference. If you are European, you can travel all over the world. If you're African, you cannot travel all over the world. And so there is a big difference. So what we try to do is try to make them feel welcome, the most comfortable as possible, and even we really think that the integration and the only way to defeat the racial prejudice is to meet and to know each other. And there are many ways to meet and know each other.
Andrea, could you maybe give some examples of some concrete ways?
Yes.
How does it work?
For example, food. I mean, in Italy and in Greece, we eat well. We couldn't understand why in the refugee center you have to eat so badly. Fed like animals, just to eat because you don't have to die of hunger. While, to make a good pasta or a bad pasta is not different in time, in money. It's just probably what you put in it. And if I make a good pasta for my family, why can't I make a good pasta for them? Or, for example, making them work with us. And one day we had the pasta and one day we had zigini, if we are talking about Eritreans or Ethiopians. For example, another thing is most of these people are young, are underage, 15, 16 years old, people traveling by themselves. They come after a 6-month journey, Sudan, the desert of Libya, the camps in Libya. And in these camps in Sudan and Libya, they suffer a lot. All kind of violence, of torture, of sexual abuse. So when they get here, if they cross the sea, they are tired, they need psychological help. And we started thinking, how many more chances would these young people have to visit Roma? In Roma we have millions of visitors every year, people that pay thousands of dollars or euros to visit, to come to Rome. It's their chance. So we started working with the students of the university and organizing trips around Roma. They are for 3 days in Roma. Why cannot they see the Colosseum, St. Peter, Fontana di Trevi? Or these are the things that we cannot understand about institutional centers. Why isn't it possible to do this thing? These things are not only good for them, they're not only good for us, but we really think that this good practices are good for humanity and for people to live better together.
Great, thank you. Maybe Gordana, I could turn to you because the reception of migrants, refugees in transit in Serbia surprised some people, maybe unfamiliar with the situation in Serbia, surprised that it was relatively well organized, and also surprised a little bit at society's response. Now, maybe those of us outside of Serbia were mistaken to be surprised, but perhaps you can explain a little bit the nature of the reaction. I think it's also important that you explain a little bit where your group, Group 484, comes from. I mean, the background of the creation of this group that you're working with.
Thank you, Niccolo. Welcome everyone. My name is Gordana and I'm coming from Group 484. So the name of the organization is actually, the organization was established in 1995 in order to help organize 484 families who were refugees from Croatia. So somehow the organization was actually established in order to provide humanitarian assistance and humanitarian support to those fleeing war and persecution. As you said, Serbia was also one of the countries on the Western Balkan route that had significant migratory pressure in the previous year. According to the UNHCR statistics from June 2015 up to 15th of June of this year, we had registered approximately 650,000 people. From that number, only 583 made an application for the asylum. So there was a huge gap between those who wanted to stay and those who wanted to transit. I would like to reflect later on the point of the transit and how the countries perceive themselves as transit countries. And first, I would like to answer your questions. So the support and the response of the country itself, the government and the people, especially the people, was very positive. And as you said, maybe it surprised a lot of people outside the country, and it surprised also some people in Serbia. We can say that the biggest focus was on providing humanitarian and emergency aid, medical support, and distributing food and non-food items. Many local initiatives, many individuals coming to the informal or informal places where refugees and migrants are gathering in order just to make some help in a way that they can. Our organization was also providing humanitarian assistance. We were distributing the food and non-food items on the entry points and the exit points at the same time. We were also active in providing the psychosocial support to people trying to provide psychosocial support. And I would now like to reflect on the point of transit, as there was also an issue that was brought upon in the first panel, as well as some of the countries on the route perceive themselves as a transit country and an immigration country. And I can agree that there is a situation in Serbia as well. So that statistic, that big gap between the number of registered persons and the number of persons who made an asylum application was somehow misused by the government officials in order not to develop integration policy. So we now do not have any integration policy in Serbia and at the moment. But certain steps will be made in the future, especially regarding the accession process and the activities, measures that need to be implemented. And as regards integration, is a huge and important element of common European asylum system. And in that regard, certain steps have been made. A twinning project is now implementing in Serbia, and one of the aspects is developing an integration plan. And the government is somehow at the point that they see civil society organization as a valuable partner in implementing the integration policies. So I'm sure that in the future there will be a lot of need in that area.
Thanks. And it's good that you brought up this issue of transit country, destination country. because there's an overriding question about how we frame the debate about, and then therefore the policy issues that come out of it, about whether we're understanding people as on the move or as arriving somewhere where that place is, and we understand the different countries in Europe also have different ideas of themselves as either places that people are going through or places that people are trying to reach. That there's tied up with that is the impression that when we speak about Europe's responsibility towards refugees, our responsibility somehow only begins once they've arrived, perhaps even once they've been recognized as refugees. And this is a presupposition that we perhaps ought to call into question. With those interrogations in mind, I want to come to you, Christina, to maybe try and tell us how you see it in terms of what stage we're in of the evolution of this phenomenon. Are we in the moment of emergency, where there's a genuine crisis and we need an emergency response? Are we in a moment of integration where people are already here, they're maybe not planning on moving, they need to be integrated? Are we in both of those situations at once? How do you see the overall picture?
Hello everyone. I would just like to share with you my experience from my fieldwork in Lesbos Island. This is part of my work with Chatham House as an SNF fellow. My work is mostly focused on reception capacity and relocation scheme. And prior to this, as a lawyer, I have done quite a lot of stuff as a volunteer, legal consultancy with refugees in Athens. So from my experience, I would like to say that right now the situation in Greece is that basically from a transit country, Greece is becoming a country of first asylum, which is very critical and very challenging for the asylum system in Greece, taking into consideration a lot of gaps at policy level, a lot of insufficiencies regarding staff, regarding funds, etc. The situation right now at the island in Lesbos is that most of the asylum seekers, as you may know, they are in detention kind of situation. We have only 2 or 3 open centers in Lesbos, so you have the most vulnerable groups hosted over there. And I feel that these are extremely good initiatives which are run mostly from civil society movements and from volunteers and from local authorities and representatives. So my understanding is that we are not in the situation that we used to be last summer. Of course, the EU-Turkey deal has had an extreme impact to the people on the ground, which means that it had lots of legal implications. And of course, there's a lot of political pressure to Greece to implement the agreement, which has been controversial according to a lot of NGOs on the ground. My very last point would be that I believe that there are ways to engage the local community with the refugees, and this is what happened actually in Lesbos Island. You have seen that the locals, the citizens, they are extremely hospitable to the refugees. I mean, in terms of food delivery, in terms of blankets, or trying to socialize or try to implement and take initiatives like social activities with the kids. Another priority as well is the unaccompanied kids that I think we have not spoken a lot about this, but it's a very critical issue as far as I understand it in Greece and at the Greek islands right now. And so for my last point would be that we need to tackle the hate speech narrative. And I believe that Lesbos could be a good example of good engagement of the local communities with the refugees, and of course with the participation of young people and of youth in this whole thing.
Thank you. Marta, I want to build on what Christina said and also add a dimension, which is, I mean, Christina brought up the issue of the narrative, the way that the political and public perception is framed of this. And so, I mean, one question is about what we can do to change that, also as civic actors. But as part of that and building on it, I want to ask you, since we're in the context of a conference on philanthropy, it's the first time for me for such an occasion, to ask you, I mean, how you would see the role of philanthropy. There's already been a discussion as the differences between maybe philanthropy and charity, the role of it, its possible disadvantages, risks. So these two issues.
Wow.
And you won't be the only one I invite to reflect on these things. So.
Niccolo, I sense that you left the trickiest question for the end, but I will take my chances here. Yeah, I mean, philanthropy is a beautiful word. It comes from the Greek term philos, anthropos. It's the love for our fellow humans. And there's nothing wrong fundamentally with the term. The problem arises when the term is connoted with certain political and cultural contexts. And from this perspective, I would say that I'm rather closer to the Greek edition of the term solidarity. In Greek, solidarity stands for allηλεγγύη, and it translates into to stand close to each other, side by side, and not following a top-down approach. And if you sense that I'm a bit over-concerned about concepts and narratives, it's possibly because I'm working and living in the borderlands between academia and applied activity. I'm a social anthropologist, but my work is not limited on the academical domain. I am trying to apply what I learned from the field and transform it into tangible activities. And from this perspective, I am kind of concerned about the ethical aspects of our narratives and how they affect our practices, because I think that these two are inextricably related. And it's not a concern for the sake of semiotics. It's a concern that derives from the knowledge that concepts and definitions shape our thoughts, shape our perspectives, and consequently, they shape our activities. And as a starting point, which is a critical point to me, I think we need, and I couldn't agree more, that we need to finally diverge from this dominant narrative, the mainstream representation of refugees and their crisis as such. First of all, whose is this crisis? Is this a crisis, like a friend used to say, and I'm quoting him, caused by the refugees or met by the refugees? And this is, we have to agree, the popular institutional narrative, the narrative of the crisis, the narrative of people living in extreme, people in need of, people in distress, people suffering loss and trauma, people in a state of deprivation, in a state of exemption. And I can see the reason behind emphasizing these particular aspects, for sure, and I'm not denying that there is a tremendous need for humanitarian support. But the question is why we need humanitarian support in the first place. And to me, this is, let's say, the most critical point to shed light upon. Because I think that, I've mentioned this before, that narratives shape our practices. whether we realize this or not. And I should be fair enough to distinguish between charity-oriented, top-down humanism and between initiatives that follow an inclusive and participatory approach that stimulates empowerment, that stimulates the potential for integration. And I'm particularly focusing on this aspect because the narrative, and without an attempt to overgeneralize here, but the popular narrative at the moment is the narrative that puts refugees in a state of voiceless category, and I don't at all sympathize with this idea of being people without a voice. Of course they have a voice, but we'd rather listen to certain fragments of their talks, to certain parts of their stories. And to sum it up, I think that, yes, philanthropy and solidarity, or let's call it what it feels more appropriate, does not hold the answer because it does not ask the proper question. Of course, again, and I need to point this out, I don't neglect the fact that it is very much needed. It is urgently needed. But in a way, from a more political or philosophical perspective, it turns to depoliticize the issue.
Okay.
And by putting the focus on the temporariness of the state of need. That's
good.
That's my concern.
Let me take some of your words and pose a question, and then I want to leave plenty of time for exchange with the audience, because I think there's lots that people will want to pick up on. But I mean, the question is this: you're all practitioners to some extent, there with your organizations in the field. What do you need from philanthropists? Whether we understand philanthropists as donors, we understand philanthropists as concerned citizens who want to stand with you. What do you need? And maybe also what do you really not need? Nadia.
I see Martha's point about solidarity and absolutely agree. I think I would like to add to the philanthropy and the solidarity 2 more levels. And I would say the governments are there, whether we like it or not, and they do have a role. Humanitarian support through NGOs, philanthropy are there. Grassroots organizations are also there. They're not necessarily solidarity groups. And then you have the solidarity groups. I think as long as the roles are distinct, and of course there's overlap, but we all know what each can provide, and each can provide the best of what they do. I think, and we can work together, that the best result is going to come. I think the government has a role in legislation. It is their responsibility to have the laws that facilitate asylum, facilitate the procedures, facilitate the quotas of the distribution of the refugee camps. The humanitarian support is very important in the emergency state. Grassroots organizations, solidarity groups cannot do the work to the extent that the humanitarian groups can. We could never support 5,000 people with blankets and food during winter in Lesbos. We could not do that. On the other hand, grassroots organizations have a flexibility that the humanitarian organizations do not have. We can, in an hour, make a decision that could take days and days for a very simple thing for any big organization to do. We could do field work much easier, faster, adapt faster that big organizations can do. Solidarity groups do have a huge role as we move towards integration, because it is the solidarity groups that are going to build up the bottom-up approach that Martha was talking about. and establish a true and a long-term and sustainable integration of the people. So the way I see it is, as we move from emergency to integration, we move from the roles of the humanitarian agencies towards the solidarity groups being more important. I think everybody has a role, and I think the last year has taught us that as long as we work together, we can do much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to pick up on the question of what do you need, what do you not need? Let me go to Christina, and then I come back.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about the need for more coordination of the field, on the ground. We know very well that at the islands, especially in Lesbos, since the beginning of the crisis, there have been so many charities, NGOs, civil society, volunteers, everyone. But you still see that there's, of course, I'm not going to mention again the lack of leadership, state mechanism. This has been said already by the other speakers. But I think it's very critical and it's very challenging for these people deployed, the social, I'm talking about the activists, the social workers, about the civil society. It's very critical to coordinate themselves with themselves, like in an effective and sustainable way, so as to be able to address the needs of the refugees. And yeah, I think this is the most important thing so far. For example, another thing is the legal aid. Nobody is talking so far about the lack of legal aid on the ground. In Lesbos right now, there are so many asylum seekers. They want to apply for asylum, and they don't have representatives. They don't have lawyers, because there are not many lawyers to tell them, to inform them about their rights, how they can, go through the registration process, then the fingerprinting, what rights they do have, how long the whole procedure takes, which is a bit of a hindrance for them. They don't know where they are, so it can create a lot of conflicts within the different nationalities amongst the asylum seekers. For me, I see it as a priority right now.
Thanks. Gordana, you wanted to come in.
Thank you. Yes, I will also agree with what Christina was said, that lack of coordination is one of the aspects of the problem and areas of improvement in a way of solidarity and the help of others. It's a positive thing that this crisis has produced numerous organization and individual actions, but better form of coordination is actually needed. And another thing that I also wanted to, that was like my first point when you asked the question, the need of protection of international human rights standards. If we look at the policies that were made on EU level and the level of certain member states, in regard to the access to the territory, and latest one, EU-Turkey deal, we can see that the respect of international human rights law, especially international refugee law, is in stake. And I think that organization and civil actors, generally actors involved, should should stand in a pan-European level and defend the basis and the findings of international law. We have forgotten that asylum is an individual right, and every person has a right to seek asylum. And to decide is a refugee or economic migrant is a decision made after the completion of the process, where all the circumstances of the case are taken into account by the competent authority.
That's also some part of forgetting about history, which I think links up with the previous film and discussion. There was Marta and then Andrea, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for remarks and questions.
So this is the ground to address our expectations from philanthropy or solidarity. So for the sake of the love of our fellow men, I think I will think outside the domain of humanitarian support, because this is there, this is given, this is safeguarded, and I would humbly suggest to give ourselves a chance to include the people in the narrative. I remember when the previous panel started, it's very indicative, there was this symbolic suggestion by, I think it was Mr. Stjoga from Tolberg, to bring refugees into this room, and we were exposed to some really powerfully dramatic pictures, and this was a very symbolic gesture. But I suggest we go for the literal application of it, and we involve refugees themselves in this narrative, in the policy-making practices, and we attempt to refrain from talking on behalf. But I'm not saying this out of political correctness. We have a lot to learn from these people. We're exclusively focusing on their needs, while we should be focusing on their skills, on the expertise that they bring. And after all, they are the first to know. They have, first-hand experience, if nothing else. It's important to mention here. So this would be a first suggestion outside the domain of humanitarian support. And the second, which is a more daring approach, is to challenge the institutions to support, by all means, and not only financial means, but visibility means as well, researches and works that address critical issues that are not always convenient. And by this I'm referring to aspects like the legal protection, for example, and the misdeeds and all the wrongdoings that refer to the universal legal protection of refugees, for example. I'm also referring to territories that are not, to my understanding, adequately addressed so far. Another indicative example is what I used to call the dark side of solidarity. And by this, I mean that we are, and I put myself first in this industry, we are involved in an industry as social researchers, as humanitarian actors. We are responsible. And there is a lot of profitable ground around, and we should be very concerned about cases of misuse, financial misuse, about cases of abuse, psychological abuse. We should be very concerned about cases where the application of solidarity is distorted. And we should be brave enough to bring these cases in the foreground, possibly. I know that it sounds too far, but this is the full spectrum of where our actions could address themselves towards, apart from the very domain that we are all here to critically reflect on. Thank you.
Thanks. I think there's plenty of people who agree with you, apparently, which is a good sign. We're achieving something with the future aspect, the spreading the knowledge.
No, of course.
Andrea.
I'll be very quick. I agree with all the things that have been said. So I think there is one thing we should underscore, that it's Europe. It's the first time that I think the solidarity and activism for these people is a true European fight. Lesbos, Lampedusa, Ceuta, Melilla, Thessaloniki, Rome, Idomeni, or the Brenner Pass, we are talking about the same thing. So we need Europe, we need a different Europe, we need European laws, and we need also European contacts between activists and volunteers. And it's probably the first time that I feel it so strongly. Second, everybody said, I want to say it too, information. Information is, at least in Italy, the information we have on migration is not the right information, because we don't have good journalists, because we don't have studied enough what's happening, what has happened, and what is going to happen. Third thing, and I don't know if it's politics, but I feel like saying it's intelligence. Brain. In Italy, most of the migrants, for example, they come from Eritrea. Tens of thousands. And, well, they have the right of protection because they run away, Italian government says and European says, from a cruel dictatorship. So it's strange when you go to read that who sells weapons to this cruel dictatorship? Well, Italy is the first country in selling weapons to this cruel dictatorship, recognizing that it is a cruel dictatorship, and since it recognizes it, we accept the migrant. There is something wrong with this.
So now I want to invite all of you to pose your questions, give your remarks. I want to leave around about 10 to 15 minutes for that, if I can get away with it. So, I mean, I see a question and there's a microphone coming, and then there. Maybe we take 2 or 3 at once, if it works.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to ask how easy it is to seek support for whatever it is that you do. What kind of narrative you put forward in order to seek support? Who is it that supports you? Is it foundations? Is it people, societies? How do you achieve the levels of solidarity that you have or have not experienced, and what are the challenges? And to turn your question around a bit, you asked what you would expect from philanthropy. So from foundations or from organizations that support you, what is it that you expect? Thanks.
Thanks. And let's take the one there, and then we'll come back, and then I'll do a second round. So if you pass it to your left.
Yeah, a question on the sort of slightly longer term issues on migration or refugees in Europe. I mean, if you look at the legal framework, the landscape in Europe, one trend that is very clear is that pretty much every country is making it a lot more difficult to be granted asylum, which basically means that the difference between what you were initially describing as transit and destination countries is basically going to gradually disappear. And you're also going to have a situation where tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that have come to Europe will not get asylum. And essentially, a lot of European countries will be looking to do deals similar to the one to Turkey, that basically be able to deport these people back to countries that will be claimed to be safe countries, even though, of course, we can debate whether that's the case. Many people like that will not want to be sent back for fairly obvious reasons. And the logical, unfortunate response to that from many governments would be to lock them up. As grassroots people, what do you see your role to be for this group, which is essentially a group that, at least in principle, has been given legal due process, but have been found to be legally, quote-unquote, unwanted. Yet, I suppose you could still make a humanitarian argument on their behalf. Is that something that you think you could, should, would do? Or are there, frankly, others that are more in need?
Okay. I changed my mind. I'm going to take one more, and then we come back. I'm feeling generous.
Well, thank you very much, Niccolo, because my question in some sense is related to the previous ones. In the previous discussion on the film, we heard that one of the reasons Europeans are reacting so negatively against the arrival of large numbers of refugees, migrants, incomers, is that there's a whole generation that hasn't experienced war in Europe, and therefore we're not used to the flux, the rapid change, in an environment in which a whole generation, let's call them the baby boomers, the post-war generation, have not really had their lives upset, and they expect things to get better. So my question collectively to you is, what's inspired you to get engaged in this area? Because in theory, you should also be a continuation of that European generation that hasn't known war. Is there any individual events, or is it because you are more linked in, perhaps this is my supposition, to what's going on elsewhere in the world? But I'd like to hear your views as to what drew you into this area and convinced you could make a difference.
Good, thank you, Claire, for this question. So, I mean, there were 3 questions I summarized quickly. The first was about who supports you and what do you expect from philanthropists. There was a question about people who were expelled but refused to leave and so are kept in detention. What should we do with those people? And the third question about what inspired you to do what you're doing, actually. Now, who wants to have a go maybe at the first one first, and then we'll see who wants to have a go at the second one second, and so on.
Yeah, if I may start from the last one. So my main inspiration was, I would say, my master's studies in the University of Strasbourg. So I had the first incentive to deal initially with internal displacement. So I was not doing refugee law from the very beginning. And I ended up doing refugee law and legal aid to asylum seekers. So for me, the most fascinating part is when I had the opportunity to volunteer at the very beginning with a French NGO in Strasbourg. So they were coming to us and they were seeking legal aid, mainly asylum seekers from Africa, Maghreb, and Chechnya. And to the question number 2, my answer would be that when it comes to detention, as a lawyer, the only policy response that I can see is providing more, inform better the people for their right to seek asylum. And then, even if the response is not negative, even if we cannot say that they are refugees and they are economic migrants, they, according to international refugee law, they are entitled to seek asylum in Europe. So I would say that the crucial now priority is legal aid right now, at least for Greece. And number 1, if I understood well the question, it was about the narrative and how the narrative can shift, right?
I think it was partly that. It was about who's supporting you and what you would expect from them.
Basically, for me, integrity, transparency, accountability of the NGOs and charities and institutions involved is question number 1. And question number 2 is definitely put into the whole process, engage people, empower young people who should have a voice. Because I can tell you that when I was in Lesbos, I met lots of young people, not only Greeks, of course not, lots of British, lots of Americans, Canadians. I don't want to omit any nationality. And they were really passionate. They were doing true volunteering, as Martha said. Like they didn't they didn't gain any benefit from the whole thing. So these are the main things that I consider priorities.
Thanks. Others don't feel obliged to answer all the questions. You might just want to respond to one part or another. Maybe Andrea next, then I come to Ned.
Very quickly, who inspired us? Who made it? Well, probably apart from the political and the social consciousness of each of one, it's really once you go out of your house and you see that you have 1,000 people sleeping on the sidewalk, you start thinking maybe it's time to do something, and it's probably the most clean way to start working with this. And this made possible that, so I get also to the other question, that helping us in Baobab are citizens. Young student, 15 years old, they go out from school and they come, and in school they collected something to bring to Baobab, or 80-year-old person who went only to play cards at night at the bar, and then same thing. Playing cards at the bar, they saw people on the sidewalk and say, what can I do? So maybe even teaching them to play cards. It's a way to help them and to make them feel home, you know. So that is people who is bringing us the things are the citizens of Roma, and for me it was a great discovery. I didn't know anymore that Roma had a heart like this, and it came out. And it was nice to see it. I mean, it was nice not only for the migrants or the refugees, but it was also for me.
Good. Nadia, and then we go to Gordana.
So on what inspired me, I went for just 1 week last year in Lesbos, just to volunteer. I thought I was going to just give out some clothes, maybe make some sandwiches. And then I saw these people walking 70 kilometers from the north part of Lesbos to the centers down. That was a 3 days walk. Back then there were no buses, people were walking the whole distance, unless some tourists would donate some money for buses, and that's where normal walking came from, because our first initiative was to collect money to pay for buses for mothers and kids not to have to walk for 3 days. Once we were there, I can say I was inspired by the refugees themselves. I was expecting to see misery and fear, and I was seeing hope, and I was feeling that in us they were thanking Europe. And although it was a big burden to bear, I thought we need to do more than we're actually doing, and that brought me back again and again. I think what is stayed with me as well is what Andrea was discussing about this new Europe that has been forming. I would dare to extend that to a new world that has been forming. The people coming together, we didn't know. I was speaking English to people next to me, and they were Greeks. We didn't know who was from which country. We had just one goal, and we were working together, coordinating together to provide the best we can for the people who were reaching Europe. I really felt that being really inspiring and really wanting to be part of this group. About Mirto, you asked about what is the narrative. I think the narrative is exactly that, is the positive narrative that we need to communicate to people about the real people the refugees are. The refugees are not strange people that are here to harm us. They are people, they have stories, communicate their stories, then people start to understand. And this is a sustainable change. It's not just a shock of a picture. The island picture was very good at providing us with reach. People wake up and understand something is happening. But as a story, as a storytelling, is the true emotions of the refugees in themselves that are really providing us with sustainable help.
Good. Thank you. Gordana.
Thank you. So regarding the third question, what inspired me? Well, as someone who was in my childhood, a lot of people that I knew, relatives and family members, were refugees. So in that way, refugee thematic was something that attracted me in the earlier period of my life, and later on my studies, I focused on refugee law. Regarding the second question, as a legal analyst, I would definitely take the case, and I will try first of all to find is there, regarding taking into account all the circumstances of the case, is there any legal ways to grant some kind of permission of stay of that person on the territory of that country. On the second of all, if there are no options, that also regarding the European Convention of Human Rights, there are specific obligations regarding the duration of the detention. So in that way, the person cannot be in detention forever. And as for the first question, well, the focus of Group 484 is the improvement of migration and asylum system in general. So we are currently providing humanitarian support, but besides humanitarian support, we have very strong advocacy activities, and in that regard, we are trying to advocate on the changes that are currently implemented and that were implemented before in regard to strengthening and enhancing the asylum immigration system. We are part of the couple of networks of NGOs. One network that is actually following the implementation of the Chapter 24 and 23. We are also the leading organization in one project that is gathering civil society organizations who have long experience in migration issues on a regional level. So these are not organizations in Serbia, it's an organization in the region. So we are very trying to address all the issues that are involved in the context of migration. And as well, we have an intercultural program through which we are implementing a lot of different intercultural activities in the local communities where the asylum centers are, and working especially with youth, as in order to integration to take place, those people who got the refugee status need to be accepted by the local communities. So in a way, there is a huge need of trying to diminish prejudice in the local communities and try to make a society that will accept others.
Thanks. Marta, do you want to respond, or?
Yeah, I'm reflecting all this time, and I don't really know how to respond to the inspiration question. I think I'm becoming banal. I mean, I'm inspired by the people and by our tremendous capability, you know, of being able for the best and for the worst at the same time. So I am inspired by people, and I am infuriated by people and policies, and these two walk hand in hand. And it is these elements are very indicative of our human nature, after all. So I think that this is the driving force. If you want to have a more personal answer, since we're talking ethically, politically, personally here, I was deprived of a very dear person of mine. Back at the fragile age of adolescence, I was raised to be an adult by this guy of Pakistani origin, and he was deported because he failed to renew his documents. And I don't know, I'm still asking myself. It might have had an impact on, I don't know, on my stream of thinking. And to return to the practical, rational, political aspect of discussion, detention policies of keeping people stranded in between borders. I honestly keep my hopes slim. I mean, I am a pragmatist. I'm not cynical, but I tend to think and take into account the realistic state of things. And what I mean by this is that the newly established EU-Turkish deal is in fact not a novelty. It's not a new thing. We have seen this in the past. This is what we attempted to do with Libya. And this is very indicative. The pattern is tried before, has been applied before, and there is this precedent that we will attempt, I'm afraid, to apply in the short future. We have already the first indications about first countries like Somalia, Eritrea, if I'm not mistaken, countries that their citizens we do not acknowledge as refugees. And this is highly problematic and highly hypocritical and highly, I don't know, unstable as an argument, because these two terms, the migrant and the refugee, by default, merge and blur, and a migrant can find themselves in the shoes of a refugee, and the other way around. So it's not a static feature that we are entitled to attribute to a certain person. We were discussing this with Christina last night. We need to take into account the wider legal framework, but at the same time to look into each case individually. And yeah, to put a full stop here, I don't really think that Europe will drastically shift from this deterrence approach. I'm not optimistic at all, but this does not stop us from being present. This does not stop us from approaching the issue maybe from a smaller scale perspective, putting the emphasis on things that can be applied on the ground, and step by step, gradually and in a systematic way, yes, we do have a voice, migrants, refugees, and we here, and this voice can be heard in the policy making level, in the institutional level, and where there are, ears eager to listen to these voices.
Very good. I have the impression we perhaps ought to draw this to a close. I'm not totally sure how much time we have, but I suspect it's better that we close now to catch up with the schedule. We heard again and again on this panel, amongst other things, the importance of the voices, whether they be of the refugees or the people who are working with the refugees, being amplified as one of the main chances for changing the social political situation. And I think that the consequence we all ought to draw from that is we all have a responsibility in this room, not only to engage over these 2 days, but to amplify the voices outside of this room when we all go back to wherever it is we came from, and hopefully by setting a good example, many others will follow. I, with that, want to invite you to join me in thanking all the panelists.